All right, Ethan. So this is my reply, and rather involved reply, because I'm thoroughly amazed and enthused with your idea of a project to make a pond in that backyard. I always wanted to. In fact, often Poppy would come home and I would have dug yet another hole somewhere in the backyard, filled it up with water, hoping for a sea turtle or a dolphin or something to just show up. I was younger than you at that point, but all the same, I have always been into ponds in a big, enormous way, fascinated with water, and that has never sated or lessened over the years. So anyway, the idea of building a pond is more fun to think about sometimes than to actually do, but I think you have the chutzpah and the stick-to-itiveness to make it happen. So I'd like to help in any way that I can. And I thought what I would do first is to walk you through all that was involved in the making of the pond at our current house. I don't have notes from the previous house. I do have pictures, but for this one I have a lot of notes. So one February afternoon before Kira had to head back to school, she and I sat down and we kind of doodled roughly what we thought would be kind of a cool water feature in the backyard. And there's lots of little things here worth noting, but basically we started by drawing out, and none of this is to scale at this point, but drawing out basically the layout of the backyard, much more simple than your backyard. Leaving space here for the pump house and for the vegetable garden, and sketching out where we wanted a path. And I knew even then that I wanted everything to be level, because someday I'm going to be 70 years old and I don't want to have to climb over clever arching bridges, which maybe in retrospect would have been fun because I could have always leveled it later. So I may actually build an arching or an arced bridge at some point. We did have a feature in this sketch that I did not include in the ending, and that is these stones that would appear to be floating on the water. And over here is a sketch of how it would work. A pole would be shoved into the ground and anchored with cement, and a platform welded to the pole, and then the stone would be glued to the platform, and this would be water level across here, and it would look like the stone was floating on water, and fish could swim under and it wouldn't obstruct the water. But there were several problems with this. One, I don't weld. Two, the pole shoves right through the liner. Not great. So we abandoned that idea pretty quickly in a subsequent sketch. Also in this, we knew the direction we wanted the water to flow. You can see it coming out of the back pond, down the stream, and into the water here, and then into this intake in the catch, through the underground pipe. Now here's where things differ. I had a biofilter in the structure, because that's what I had in the previous pond. And here would be the valve for that, and the pump house would be around this biofilter. That changed significantly. Since we already had this wooden structure, we went ahead and made that the pump house, and you want your pump to be as low as possible. So this in elevation is higher than this water. That's why it runs down and creates the stream effect. So the level of this water is actually where you want your pump to be. So I'll walk through at the end of this with my camera to show you where these things are in the art itself. All right, let's move on. There were other sketches to consider. Oh, before I go, there's an effect, and I deal with this later in another sketch. So it might make more sense when we look at that sketch, but the water level here and the stone that goes partly in the water, partly out of the water, and then growth above the stone. This is a natural profile of water. Often what people do that makes their pond look weird is to dig the hole and then build up the area around the water feature, and then add their water. And it looks odd. It looks like military mounds, like out at like they have in the fields in Yorktown. where they build these mounds that go up and then down, and it's not a natural way. Water always finds the lowest ground, so you want to make your water feature look like it is the lowest point in the yard. And you can do that by actually making the lowest point, or there are some optical illusion things that you can employ. And a combination is probably more realistic. All right. Oh, here's that sketch right now. This is bad. This is good. So you dig out your pond and you make this mound and you fill your water level up to here, but this is your actual ground level. Well, that doesn't look right. And people, when they see that, can calculate, well, gee, why isn't the water finding the lower ground? That's not natural. So although it doesn't, they may not know why it bugs them, it will bug them. But this, and I just have level ground, but you could have the ground swooping up or whatever. And then don't fill your pond all the way up as much as you can. You want to leave some fluctuation, and there's lots of reasons for that. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But on this bad example, one way to conceal it is with bushes. If you put in a big giant bush around here, you wouldn't know how low this land is. So we can talk about that again later. All right. This was a preliminary order of procedure or order of operations. And you can see where we changed our mind on a couple of things. Now, dealing with such a small area, it was important for us to make sure, here, let me go back. We didn't have any room for error. And by the time we were done planning this pond, it had 30,000 pounds or 15 tons of stone involved. And you need a staging area for all that stone. So the stone couldn't show up before the dirt had been hauled away. So we hauled out enough dirt that when we finished digging all of this, it filled this whole area here, which is kind of a driveway right now, 4 feet high for the most part. That had to be hauled away before the stone was delivered. So anyway, it took planning out the order of operations to make sure we didn't get ourselves in a bind. And that included the liner when that showed up and when we would lay it, because the liner weighed 225 or 26 pounds, something like that. It weighed basically like a human being. And as you know from wrestling, just picking up someone over your head and walking around with it isn't a wonderful experience. All right. Your order of operations will be different, but start thinking about this right away. Start writing down and be prepared to change and move things around. And this wasn't even the final. We had a printed final, which I don't know where that is. Maybe it's on my computer somewhere. I might find it, and it had a lot more steps, maybe 20. All right, then I began thinking about cost. My biggest expense was going to be stone, and yours should not be. I'm not recommending that you wind up with the amount of stone that we wound up with. And the truth is, you can build your water feature and add stone to it over time, and we've done that as well. So you don't have to have everything going. Really, you just need a hole and a way to keep it from leaking. And this was the way we calculated the stone, and also how we calculated a more accurate volume for the pond. Now, I ran your dimensions through a pond calculator and came up with 2,026 gallons. 3,000 gallons is actually pretty ideal if you would consider making it just a wee bit bigger. And the reason I say that is what you're looking to create is a self-balancing, self-correcting ecosystem. And when I say self-correcting, I mean the chemistry of a water feature changes throughout the year, throughout the day. You want those changes to be accounted for and adjusted naturally. Now, there are all kinds of products and devices that try to mimic the natural conditions that should exist and prevent the conditions that shouldn't exist. But those all need cleaning, tending to, measuring, and it's also not natural. Nature already provides a way to balance your chemistry. So you may not have the orientation here because everything is kind of cattywampus and not connected, but I've connected it as far as the measurements are concerned. Some of these are upside down. Actually, this whole thing probably is a little bit upside down. But anyway, I needed to know fairly accurately, and we had it down within 100 pounds of stone. So it paid to take time because stone is expensive, and you want some stone, at least to start. So take the time to do your measurements accurately. And also, if you use local stone, local river stone, it's a lot cheaper. For us, it was $56 a ton, believe it or not, for the stone that lined our liner. And then the more expensive stone could be $300 or $400 a ton, a big difference. This is a cross profile of what we were trying to achieve in the larger and the deeper areas of the stone, of the pond. Large stone here to prevent soil and debris from coming in. This thin line here represents our liner and our felt that goes above the water level, which is halfway through this large stone. These are mortared in with concrete. I'm not recommending this for you. I'm just showing you what we did. But to keep those stones from tumbling out and also to allow us to clean and do other things in the pond, we actually put stepping stones that you would put in a garden along the bottom. And this again is kind of a measurement, maybe this was an earlier slide, of not drawn to scale, but the actual dimensions that we had to work with. And some cute pictures that Kira put on the side here. And some cute pictures that Oliver put in. But this is a cross section of, here's our porch, and here's a bridge that was designed to be a drawbridge. We have not finished that. We haven't put in the hinge, but that's all that's waiting. It's basically a drawbridge without a hinge. So, and here's the stone and the amount. It wasn't a square stone. Well, the stone that's there now is not square. It varied between 27 and 30 inches long. And we actually designed it so that there is water underneath this large stepping stone. So fish and frogs and whatever else have a place to hide. And that's something you need to think about, is the stress levels of your creatures. And penguins. We also devised a way to add stone so it could be somewhat flexible. There's a product called rock dust. So if you're doing stepping stones anywhere around your pond, rock dust is a very inexpensive but very heavy material that allows for fluctuation between hard surfaces. Leave PVC pipe for future railing. Oh, right. So we've sunk a couple of PVC pipes in the water feature that are invisible right now. They're covered with stone. But if at any point I felt I needed to add a railing, I could uncover that stone, 20 years from now and add a railing. Just wanted to think ahead on that. And I'm not suggesting these specifics for you. I'm trying to show you the thought process. Try to consider every contingency. And I'll add some, having lived in your house, contingencies that I think you ought to, or circumstances that you ought to plan for. And we came up with a computer-generated drawing of the final plan. And you see along the top here, some of this is cut off, there's an electrical conduit. It's actually not, it should have been a conduit. When we got down there, it was just open, large gauge electrical wires that feed all the electricity to the house. Very dangerous. So we created a shelf inside the pond, and I can show you that later when I walk around with the video. Created a shelf inside the pond to protect those wires. And we also laid a 4-inch conduit above those wires in case they needed to refeed electricity to our house at any point. They wouldn't have to dig up the pond. They would simply open the cap empty 4-inch pipe and shoved their wires through. And I checked that with the electric company to make sure that that was something that they would be able to use if indeed they did need to use it. And I also checked with other utilities, and we'll talk about that later because I think that's the last slide here, and that's possibly the most important. So in this change, you see we've dispensed with having stepping stones that appear to be floating on the water. Cool effect, but really not reasonable. Let me go back to that first drawing. Okay, we included in this drawing, see this dotted area? That is our bog. It's actually a fen. A bog is standing water in a marshy area. A fen is a bog with water running openly through it. So a marshland and that has a stream running through it. So what we've created here is a wetland. And that, especially where you live, is really important. Because you don't want any chemical runoff going into the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay is largely protected by marshlands all the way around the coast of the Chesapeake Bay. And marshlands include all kinds of plants and creatures that help filter and convert harmful chemicals into very healthy and useful chemicals. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. We keep piling on stuff later, but we're getting to it. All right, so here we've got a little bit more detail to our bog. These are the open bog areas. And what that means is, though it looks like land, the liner actually runs under all these areas. So the liner that we purchased was about this big. Well, I can't even, my mouse won't go off the screen far enough because we had to account for the depth of the pond. So it was a very long, I think 30 wide by 45 long. I believe that's what it was, 30 by 45 or 30 by 40, something like that. So the whole backyard was lined, and we just cut out where you see the green. That's where we aren't having any water. We wanted other plants that were not bog plants. But in here, it's all bog plants. And they serve a really important purpose that we were talking about. And without them, we would have to have this biofilter. I bought a biofilter. I wasn't convinced the bog was going to work. I had done the calculations on how much bog I needed and what kinds of plants I could use, and I still wasn't convinced that that nature was going to come through. Well, nature did come through in spades. The water stays drinkably crystal clear 365 days out of the year. Maybe 364. Usually there's one day where I clean up some stuff and the whole thing gets cloudy, but then by the next day it's crystal clear again. And that is the job of the bog. The water is flowing through pea gravel, which is tiny pebbles about a foot deep that the plants are planted directly into, and filters all that water. And what are we filtering? You're not filtering leaves and twigs or flower petals or whatever. All those things are pulled into the skimmer here. You still have a skimmer that you need to change. Those collect pine needles, anything that sort of floats in the air. That sycamore tree that's right there, all those leaves are going to wind up in your pond, and your skimmer will catch those, and you'll have to empty that. During the fall, you'll have to empty it sometimes daily, but usually once a week or less. Sometimes in the months where things are not falling, the middle of summer, middle of winter, you can go a whole month without having to change it. It depends. But what we are filtering, or what we are dealing with, are microscopic level changes in the water. And why we do not need the biofilter, and why we do need the bog, or you need one or the other. Fish poop, rotting plants, rotting leaves, the ones that do sink, food that doesn't get eaten, and bog plants that rot and die. All of those things dissolve and become part of the water. And what they do in the process of rotting, or in the process of being poop, they give off a tremendous amount of ammonia. And ammonia gone unchecked will result in a very cloudy pond. And not all ponds that are cloudy are full of ammonia. There's various reasons for cloudiness. But you can become very toxic with ammonia. The fish, although koi and the fish that I have can handle a wide range of water chemistry, including fairly high levels of ammonia, it's ideal for them and for their growth and their health and happiness to not have ammonia floating around in the water. So the process, although I don't fully understand the breakdown, basically goes like this, and maybe Kira can help us out with that some point. But basically goes like this: the poo or rotting leaves or whatever gives off the ammonia, and there's a particular bacteria in the water that converts that ammonia into nitrites, and then another bacteria that converts those nitrites into nitrates, which the plants love as if it's fertilizer. It is fertilizer. It's nitrogen. That's what's in fertilizer, among phosphorus and other things. So ammonia is converted with the help of healthy bacteria into fertilizer for the bog. And that cycle continues through. And in the winter, when things get too cold for the bog plants to grow, it's also too cold for the fish to eat, so the fish don't poop. And although the leaves are falling, it's not cold, it's not warm enough for the leaves to rot. So the whole process is quite fascinating and ebbs and flows on its own as nature intended. So you want to help out nature as much as possible. That will leave you with more time to enjoy your pond and less time fixing it. Now, there are two types of pumps. There is the external pump, which I have here, and then there is the one that they sell you and tell you to use, which is the internal pump, or the submersible pump. You do not want to use a submersible pump. You will be replacing pump year after year after year. They'll say it works for 5 to 10 years. No, it doesn't. The challenges for a pump that's underwater are just too great. All that debris, all the floating gunk that's in the water, and the pumps tend to be at the bottom of the pond where the worst of it is, all that gets pulled in. And they have to chop all that up and blow it through the pipe, and it's not great. It's not good for the pump. And so you're going to wear your pump out. When they say the last 5 to 10 years, that's in ideal situations, like in a bathtub. But the external pump, on the other hand, is terrific because it isolates the motor from the water. It's a dry pump. So your motor is not being subject to all the gunk in the water. Your skimmer is filtering out the larger things. You have a separate catch inside your external pump, and then it'll last, in that way, separating water from motor, it'll last decades. The last pump we had at the other house, 15 years it ran. Anyway, it was going strong. There's no reason for it to break down. And when it breaks down, you don't have to buy a new one. You can take it to a machinist and they can fix it. All right, after we came up with our final design here, and can't forget this, the overflow. What happens when it really rains and overflows your pond? You've got to figure out where that water's going, because you don't want that to come back to your house, under your house, or into your neighbor's yard. You've got to have a plan. Now, fortunately for us, you can't see from this, but this area of the yard is the highest, and it slopes down towards the house. That's not great. But the pond actually fixed the problem we had of water getting under the house, because there's a waterproof barrier here now that pushes the water out to this sidewalk driveway area. This, on the other hand, slopes the other way, away from the house. So it made it for an easy and natural flow. With all the stone, and you see all this stone, and you don't see all the stone in the picture, but there's stone everywhere through here in the final water feature. We had to come up with a way of moving stone. Because remember, we don't have a large staging area, and at any given point, there's a pile of dirt here, or there's piles of stone here, or there's wood, or there's liner and pump materials and PVC pipes and whatever else. So there's not a lot of space. but some of the stones were 1,000 pounds or more. So we created a lever and then worked through some calculations to figure out how long did the lever need to be, how much room did the lever need to move around, because again, we've got about 24 feet here, 17 here, but 24 all the way to the edge, and 30 feet here. Let's see. It's not going to let us see what's between here, but 30 feet from the front to the back, and realistically 17 feet swing probably once you have the lever set up in the pond area. So we had to figure that out. How big could we make, how heavy a rock could we carry? And that determined how big a rock we could get. How long this beam, the longer the arm, the heavier the stone you can lift with it, because you're extending your fulcrum. And Kira worked through the calculations, and I put this in here just because I know it makes sense, but I have no idea how or why that makes sense. Oh, you know what this is? I knew how to calculate the length of the beam. I found calculations online that helped me through that. But I didn't know how to calculate whether or not the wood I was using would be able to support the load. So how thick did this wood need to be? Wood has a specific load ratio that it can carry versus a steel pole or a steel girder or a spaghetti, string of spaghetti. Everything's got some amount of force it can handle. What was the wood's force? I didn't know. Kira helped me through that. And then we found the answers online. But that was fun to see her plow through all that. And we came up with our final calculations. Calculating how heavy a boulder is depends on what it's made out of. It's either made of sandstone or granite. Granite's much heavier. And you take 3 measurements: the width, the depth, and the height. And that gives you, and you have a conversion by dividing that 150 by that or 175 by that. So anyway, if you're not going to have huge boulders that you can't pick up with your own hands, don't worry about that. Again, what I'm trying to show you is how much planning went into this. We haven't purchased a thing yet. We are still trying to figure out what's the most we can do in the tiny space that we have to do it in. And that was one of our considerations. The other consideration is how can we do it, and the most important consideration, how can we do it in a way that is safe the whole time while we're building it and after it's built. So this tells you a little bit here. If with a 16-foot lever from the point of fulcrum, putting 200 pounds down, that's less than my weight. I weigh more than 200 pounds. But if I were to push this down, I could lift a boulder 3,760 pounds. And then we built this as a pivot that would swing around. So cool, eh? All right. Oh, so we determined the maximum that we could build is a 16 foot. We had 17 feet to work with, but we would need a foot to scrape ourselves around the sides. And that gave us 3,760 pounds. That would be the largest stone we could carry. Other things to consider with that: how do we attach the stone to our board? How do we unattach the stone once we've moved it? All right, now we're buying stuff. I bought all my pond equipment from one company, and that was important because if it didn't all work, I had one place to go back to. If I bought, and when I say pond stuff, I mean just the rubber, the tubing, all that stuff, not the stone, not the plants, not the fish, just the parts of the pond that make it a pond, but not necessarily a beautiful thing to look at. The rubber liner, and different types of connectors. There's all kinds of things here. And if you were to talk to these guys, and I recommend them, their pricing is excellent and their advice is excellent. So you can see ours just for the pond was $2,319. You can do this for a lot less. And I have an extra pump, but we would need to get a part for it, an external pump. But talk to me about that when you get to that point. I saved all my receipts, and they're not even all laid out here. There's layers of them under here. All kinds of things you don't think of. Different compounds and ointments and glues and solvents and whatever to connect all the PVC cleansers. And so I saved everything because we gave ourselves a budget of $7,000 and we kept everything within that budget. Again, the largest part of that budget was the stones. And that should not be for you. You should be able to do this with much fewer stones and cheaper stones. Now here is my final slide, and it is the most important one. This is Miss Utility, and every city has Miss Utility. And you call Miss Utility and say, hey, I'm going to build in my yard, and I need to know that I'm not going to cut through anything. Not Comcast or Cox Cable, not a gas line, no, not a water line, definitely not a sewer line, storm waste, street light wiring, anything, electricity up to the house. Now, Dominion Power did come out and they did show me where that electric line was. Thank goodness they did. So I knew to dig very carefully there. It was supposed to be laid, go back, it was supposed to be 4 feet under the ground, 48 inches under the ground. Well, it wasn't. It was 18 inches under the ground. And I dug very carefully here because I didn't know, and they said ground settles, erosion happens, you have no idea how deep that wire is, be very careful. And I was also expecting it to be in a conduit, in a pipe protecting the wire. It wasn't. The wires are just under the ground. And Dominion Power, when I told them that, said that's okay, that's the way it is, and that's fine. So, all right. I think that's enough for now. I'm going to go out to the backyard and talk about some of these things in the context of the pond. All right, Ethan, so here we are. See the layout as it is and how it relates to the plans that we set up for ourselves, our vegetable garden. And here's our pump house, and just like anybody's garage, it's full of stuff. But that is our pump running dry, bone dry, except for inside the PVC pipe and inside the pump cavity. Got my valve shut off there in case I need to work on the pump or change that catch. See that black cap or connector? And that black connector, that will allow me to disconnect the pump and swap it out for this extra pump I've got sitting here. Oh, I meant to grab a shovel because I wanted to show you the fen, or again, that's a bog with a stream running through it. So it looks like, and we may have talked about this before, looks like the water goes to here, but it actually doesn't. The water goes all the way to the edge here. See? Oh, I think there's sea in there. So these plants, they're all in this gravel. Rinse off some of that mud. These are all pushing their roots through the pea gravel. And those roots are taking the nitrites, the nitrogen out of the water and returning crystal clean water back to the fish. Now in the stream, all kinds of stuff happens in here. You see those black dots? Those are all snails that are helping control the algae. There's some much larger ones in here. There's also clams inside the rocks, in between the rocks. I'm trying to find one of the large trapdoor snails, but oh, here we go. You can see one right there. See the little bit of lighter part against his tail. Here. There we go. See him? Pretty cool, eh? This guy will eat a lot of algae. It's good. There's a lot of algae to eat. I'd like 20 more of those. And this is bog over here too, where you see these rocks. By the end of summer, you won't see the rocks, it'll all be green. You see the water pulled in here. Under that fake stone. That's the skimmer. Pipe runs underneath the stream actually into the pump house, and it comes out from the top pond. It's coming from under, about 20 inches under the water there. The pipe expels back into the system. Then flows along the stream back into the pond. And there's all kinds of plants in the bog. Some of them are edible. This is a blueberry bush. These are all flowering plants that are just starting for the season. Iris, you can see this guy getting ready to bloom. This is bok choy, which you can eat. This is spinach. It's more bok choy. That one actually looks happier. This is a dock plant that you can eat. This is a pitcher plant. I use this to help take care of some of the bugs. They fly into these pitchers and get trapped. And then the plant digests them. One of the things you had mentioned was combining bass with possibly koi. I know you're not settled on that, but you really can't do that, sadly, because they're not compatible. All the fish that I have in here are considered compatible because their character is docile. They don't attack each other, and they're not ravenously carnivorous, although they'll eat worms. But they're not cannibalistic. They won't eat each other or attack each other. And bass, by contrast, are aggressive predators. So they'll even attack each other in a small enough space. So something to consider. All right, Ethan, some final thoughts here. When you're looking to build a pond, often you'll see pictures like this, where they show these shelves in the different how-to build a pond instructionals. And sometimes you'll see something that looks like this. Now, they've got part of this right, but most of these instructional how-tos are completely wrong. So you really have to be careful, even in books. It's not just online. Obviously online can be wrong, but I've got several published books on how to build a pond that would lead to nothing but heartache in the number of fish you're going to lose, and backache in the amount of hours you're going to spend dealing with your pond. Here's another one right here. Look at those layers. Those layers are just stepping stones for fish. I mean, for birds to walk into your pond and step down. It's just a staircase to their dinner. A blue heron, and you're going to have blue herons where you are going to step, 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 and eat. There's an interesting characteristic about a blue heron. It won't eat if its feet aren't wet. And we watched this play out at our last pond. We saw a heron screaming at our pond, just standing there with dry feet, screaming. Well, why were its feet dry? So let's go back and look where I said they got part of this right. Is that here? Nope, that's another one that's wrong. Where is it? Oh, now I've lost it. Anyway, it showed, let's see. Oh, here, this'll get us there. For our pond, the heron's feet were dry because I had no stepping stones. This isn't ours. I just found this online. But look how the edges are really steep. There's nowhere for the heron to be able to get its feet wet before it eats the fish. It has to be able to wade into the water. So don't do the stepping graduated steps down from the shallower end down to the deeper end, as so many people do. This is wrong. Again, those are staircases to dinner. You want steep edges. You want nowhere for a bird to stand, and then, because once the heron lands, it spooks all the fish. It has to be able to stand there for a long time, very patiently, like a frog, unmoving, until the fish become comfortable again, and then, boom, it's got its fish. But if you don't leave a place for the heron to walk into the water, it's gonna fly away. It's gonna go away frustrated. So you want steep edges. This one here is probably more closely designed the way ours is designed. It's not straight down edges. We have very steep angles all the way around our pond. So pay attention to your design, because you don't want to set up just a dinner for a heron, and every fish that you put in there, the heron's going to fly back, and you keep putting in fish, it's going to keep coming back for dinner. Case in point, in the last house, this house has actually been pretty good, but in the last house, our neighbor was on a Fish of the Month club. He would order koi every month because he had one of those ponds with the stair steps to dinner. And the company that I bought all those pond supplies from, Webb's Pond Supplies, something like that, I consulted with them. How do I keep my fish safe? Well, there's no ultimate way to keep them safe. We lose fish. We've lost 2 fish here in 3 years, but not 2 fish a week, 2 fish in 3 years. So here's one that looks really pretty, all that natural stone. Doesn't that look great? But again, the heron can just walk right in here and just stand there and then feed. And there'll be no reasonable way to keep koi. Some other thoughts on the fish to put in your pond. Again, I'm really frowning on the idea of putting in bluegills and bass and the like. They really need a much bigger area. Both of those fish are predatorial. Most fish that you're catching in a pond or in any freshwater location, most are predatorial. The koi have been hybridized or raised to be docile. Carp are naturally docile, and that's where koi come from. And goldfish are naturally docile, and they all get along, and you don't have to worry about the predator from within. So bass will get along when they're young, and we in the other pond we had put in a albino channel cat. Well, the channel cat grew to be 2 feet and just started devouring everything, so we had to get rid of it. Again, here's another one here. Guy builds ponds for a living, and he's giving you the stair steps to dinner. Do not do stair steps. Do very steep angles. You can be clever and artful in how you do them, with plants and with other things, but you really do not want stair steps or graduated descensions. You don't need the 5 feet that you were talking about. You need 3 feet. I wouldn't go deeper than that. You'll break your back. And it's not necessary. 3 feet is deep enough for the fish to get away. The only other issue that I would be concerned with 3 feet with where you are is the water table is much higher where you are. You have salt water just below the surface. Just, at some point when you dig down, it's just going to percolate wetness. So doing this in a dry season might not be a bad idea. We plotted and planned for about 4 months, March, April, May, 4 months before we put a shovel in the ground. 3 months before we actually cashed a check. So, trying to see if there's other examples here of a deeper. Oh, here's another one. Again, with the submersible pump and the stair steps to dinner. This is what everybody is telling their clients to do and what they're installing for their clients. And this is madness. This is just going to result in heartache and hard work, unnecessary hard work. But let's look at this image to see other things that are wrong with it. You've got your underlayment or your felt, and that's right. But look at your water. It's about an inch below. Now the liner extends a foot. That's nice that it goes all the way under here, but really what you need a liner for is height. They've got their ground level just an inch or so above the water level. Well, that's terrible because this is going to settle and your water is going to spill over onto the lawn. See how they have the liner going up back here? You want it like that all the way around. So that's why you want stone further down and the water further down still. So visually, and again, they've built this up. Water coming down like this, it just doesn't look natural or feel natural. You have to be very clever. Now they've done some planting back here. And again, I know this is an illustration just to show the cross section of all that's involved in a pond. But some good things that are in here. They're leaving the liner exposed. You can do that and add rocks later when you've got some more money to spend. They've put in a plant here called a water hyacinth. That will go a long way towards keeping the water clear, even without a bog. But then they've got filtration media. This is what they're using as a biofilter. Notice they don't have a bog. If you look up bog, you can come up with all kinds of very complex structures. I looked at these where you run a series of PVC pipes through an area and then you fill that area with pea gravel and you wind up with very clean water that comes out. But water naturally disperses through pea gravel. You don't need pipes pumping it through. As you just saw, 3 years into it now with clean, clear water. So don't make your bog more complex than it needs to be. This guy's got it right. It's just moisture. Although I did my plant medium as pea gravel so I could change things about more easily. This is pea gravel here. Nice small gravel. There was a cross section of a bog up here. Yeah, this is kind of a neat picture. It shows you again the cross section of the pond. They have their water level and their ground higher than the water level, except here where the ground is the same as the water level, but they've used plants to conceal that, to give you the illusion that the ground is much higher here and making the water where it is feel natural. But they've shown you that their pond liner goes under even where it doesn't. So above ground, you don't really see this water level. You see the plants, especially as they get established. And as you looked at mine, my water level is actually well below a layer of rock. All right, those are just some final thoughts that I'll tag on to the end of this video. Let me know what questions you have. I know I've got some other comments, but one comment actually overriding all of it, and I just mentioned it briefly earlier, safety. Safety in the process of building and safety once it's built. You've got to maintain that at all times. So don't rush through any part of this. Take your time, think about it, mull over it, write out your plans, and then go back, think about it some more. A day or two later, come back and adjust, because you will. Plan on it. Oh, something else, just looking at this picture. There's always something else. You do not want to dig your pond. Actually, there were pictures of that here, weren't there? You do not want to dig your pond on organic soil. You want to dig till you come up with clay, or you need to get some clay. So somewhere around here there was a picture that showed, yeah, here we go. This is not clay. This is dark soil. This is organic soil. This is soil that will continue to break down, which means it will get smaller and smaller until ultimately it is clay. Clay is inorganic. It's as dense as it's going to get. It won't shrink anymore. But this has organic material in it. Rotting leaves, plants, whatever. This will continue to get smaller, and so his pond is going to settle and he's going to have problems. You want to dig until you have clay, and then you want everywhere your liner's going to have at least 6 inches of clay all the way around. And then on top of the clay goes your felt, and on top of the felt goes the liner. And in that way, you have a secure hole that's not going to shift, and you have a hole that doesn't have sharp, rocky points that are going to puncture the liner or the felt. So, yeah, glad I brought that up. But again, safety is paramount. So think safety the whole way through in your planning, in your executing, and in your enjoying. You have a water feature, which means the city requires a fence. You've got a fence. I don't know if it's high enough. Check that too. Make sure no kids can crawl in or crawl under, crawl over. Anyone that cannot swim, you do not want them in your backyard. That's just as simple as that. Since you can drown in a bucket of water, a pond is definitely a dangerous thing for the wrong person. Alrighty then, call me, text me, let's talk about this.